thank you kindly for your patience. Thank you very much. Let me begin with an opening and to say that truly I am so excited that everyone has accepted the invitation to this forum. Your Excellencies, respective speakers, Crimean Tatar youth, and our virtual viewers, thank you so very much for joining us here today. And I would like to thank the panelists, because I know that they have taken time away from their busy schedules to speak at the 20th session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues on the topic of justice, peace and justice, and building strong institutions linked to Sustainable 16. And the panelists here are the most appropriate speakers to touch upon the topic of justice and building institutions as it relates to occupation of Crimea. In light of the COVID-19 situation and taking account of the guidelines from the United Nations Secretary General and the World Health Organizations, the whole 20th session of the forum is virtual. And so our speakers this afternoon fit perfectly with their background to discuss our thematic discussion. And as we enter into the 7th year into the occupation of the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, destruction of indigenous institutions, historical sites, self-governing bodies, language with systemic violations of human rights, persecution, oppression, false detentions of political prisoners has reached a critical stage for the fragile indigenous community. Assault by the occupier threatens peaceful environment for indigenous Crimean Tatars. When the indigenous people of Crimea seek justice from legal institutions that are governed by the occupiers, ironically, they become the victims of justice. Persecution of Crimean Tatars have intensified with restrictions of freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, access to viable institutions for the development of Sustainable Goal 16. Our discussants will cover these topics in detail and inform the forum on the situation in occupied Crimea and its indigenous people. What needs to be done in order to create a just society for indigenous people? How can we guarantee access to justice for those who have been affected? What type of solutions and recommendations can be used to address these type of issues, challenges as well? The United Nations ECOSOC and Social Council decided that the 20th session of the Permanent Forum touch upon these on peace, justice, and strong institutions. So the Permanent Forum will organize and has organized, since we are in the last day, a series of regional dialogues for in-depth consideration on the situation of the indigenous people in each of the 7 sociocultural regions of the world. And we, as indigenous Ukrainians of the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine, are considered the Eastern European region. And the overarching goal of the regional dialogues is to contribute policy development, decision-making that affects Indigenous people and promotes the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And with that introduction, and I'm sure that we will have a back and forth between the list of our speakers, I would like to introduce Mr. Yuri Vitrenko, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Ukraine to the United Nations. And I must, as an indigenous Crimean Tatar, as an indigenous representative, commend the Permanent Mission of Ukraine to the United Nations in the multiple resolutions on the territorial integrity of Ukraine, the situation of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, the problems of militarization of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, and the multiple resolutions that support and that become a voice of the indigenous people in the halls of United Nations before the UN General Assembly. Mr. Vitrenko, please take the microphone, the virtual microphone, and begin your talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Ayla. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Given the sheer magnitude of the issue before us today, namely violations of rights of the indigenous people by the Russian occupation authorities in Crimea, it was a matter of principle and proud for the Permanent Mission of Ukraine to co-sponsor this important event. It is a pleasure to do so together with our excellent moderator, Ayla Bakali, Crimean Project and educational platform Q-Hub, and КримSOS organization. It is also a special privilege to have with us today His Excellency Mr. Anton Korinevich, Permanent Representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, as well as I understand, part of his team. Last but not least, our appreciation also goes to all distinguished panelists and participants to whom the challenges faced by indigenous peoples aren't only a matter of professional activities, but also are of personal nature. Dear friends, for already 7 years in a row, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues serves as an extremely opportune venue to draw, time and again, international attention to the critical human rights situation in the temporarily occupied Crimea. This year's forum's focus on SDG 16, namely peace, justice, and strong institutions, bodes extremely well for this cause. And by the way, if it was up to me, I would put this goal, namely peace, justice, strong institution, as an SDG #1. It is well known that Ukraine remains fully committed to the respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Yet, due to the ongoing foreign military aggression, the temporary occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions, not all citizens of Ukraine, primarily those belonging to indigenous peoples, can enjoy their ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and religious rights guaranteed by the government. It is exactly these citizens who became the most vulnerable in terms of systematic violations of human rights due to repressive campaigns, misuse of anti-extremism and terrorism law, criminalization of the Crimean Tatars as a whole, ban on the activities of the Majlis, Russia's neo-colonization policy, and recent deprivation of the rights to own land, as well as deliberate policy on changing demography in Crimea. That is why we are deeply concerned over the fate of Crimean Tatars as indigenous people of Crimea. A fate which unfortunately is very evocative of the overall dramatic deterioration of the state of human rights on the peninsula since the Russian occupation. Therefore, we are duly keeping and will keep the issue of Crimean Tatars in focus of the United Nations, as reflected in the relevant United Nations General Assembly resolutions, as well as of the Secretary General. Here, it is instrumental that Secretary General's reports prepared in accordance with these resolutions present a wide scope of necessary facts and testimonies on the restrictions faced by Ukrainian citizens, including Crimean Tatars, in exercising their economic, social, and cultural rights. A lot of work has already been done, yet even more lies ahead. Here, a special role has to be played by the new consultation and coordination format, the Crimean Platform, which is aimed at implementing a long-term vision of the occupation of Crimea. One of its primary goals is monitoring and countering human rights violations and militarization of the peninsula, protecting victims of violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, and implementation of initiatives aimed at protecting indigenous peoples, communities in Crimea. We invite all our international partners to join us in this platform and participate in its inauguration on 23rd of August. In the meantime, here in New York, we will remain, as usual, we will do our best to remain proactive and alert so as to keep the issue of indigenous peoples of Crimea high on the United Nations agenda. Having said this, I wish all participants of this side event a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuri, for your very important remarks. And I must confess, given that we're virtual and we had some hiccups in the process, let me introduce myself. I was reminded of it. I am Ayla Bakali, and I am a consultant to the Permanent Mission of Ukraine on Indigenous Matters. And I am also the US representative of the World Congress of Crimean Tatars. And I am a Crimean Tatar. And I am who I am, and I have a need to be. So therefore, within that context, I would like to introduce a very important speaker among us, and Mr. Anton Kronovich, who is the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. And I wholeheartedly underline Mr. Vitrenkov's comment that the topics of justice, peace, and institution is most appropriate for Crimea. And the president's office, in which Mr. Anton Kronovich is the permanent representative on the strategy of deoccupation and reintegration of the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, has gained tremendous traction, because there is a book on the deoccupation and reintegration of Crimeans, your strategies, on Amazon. And it's on electronic copy, but I am definitely going to look into that. And we really look forward to your comments on that. And I would like to also underline that the President's representative office in Crimea is also very much an example of building relations between indigenous people and the nation state in which these indigenous peoples reside. So on that note, Mr. Kronovich, please proceed with your speech.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Bakali. Do you hear me well?
Yes, Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much once again. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, representatives of states, governments, and civil society, Mr. Vitrenko, it's a big pleasure to see you all here today and to talk together with you on the issues of indigenous peoples, of course, which is a high priority for our state authority, for the mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, as we, of course, work closely on the issues of Crimean Tatar indigenous people. And we are doing all that we can and all that we are able to do in order to facilitate and in order to promote the issues of Crimean Tatar people inside Ukraine and, of course, also abroad in international platforms, on international arena, of course, with the help of our Ukrainian diplomats, of our international organizations. I would like to admit that now I'm talking to you from Kyiv, but just yesterday we were visiting the administrative boundary line with Crimea with the delegations of the embassies of the Czech Republic and Slovak Republic, with the deputy head of missions. And on Tuesday, the president of Ukraine, His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, visited the administrative boundary line with Crimea. So he was there in Kherson region. And he also held I would say, a briefing with all the respective army officials, governmental officials, law enforcement officials, on the issue of security of Kherson region now in times, as you know, of escalation of on the part of the Russian Federation. So this is just to say that the issue of Crimea is high on the agenda now. And in last 3 months, His Excellency the President signed 3 decrees in relation to Crimea. So this is really an unprecedented case in our Crimean history after the occupation started. So, but of course, continuing what Ms. Bakali mentioned before in the beginning, the main document which has just been drafted and has just been adopted by Ukraine is, of course, the strategy of deoccupation and reintegration of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. This strategy is in force since 24th of March. On the 24th of March, His Excellency the President signed the respective decree on the adoption of this strategy. And of course, this strategy is like a framework document concerning the positions of all the state authorities of Ukraine concerning the occupation of Crimea. So this is a legally binding positional framework, I would say political declaration for all the state authorities of Ukraine. And of course, it has issues which deal with Crimean Tatar indigenous people. In particular, it is strictly provided there that Ukraine should work in order to restore the rights of the Crimean Tatar people and other indigenous people. So, of course, this strategy itself includes the issues on Crimean Tatar people. What is also important, the month before, in February, on the 26th of February, the President, His Excellency the President, signed another decree, which is called on certain actions in relation to the deoccupation and reintegration of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. And it is very important that for the 2nd year in a row, His Excellency the President signs decrees on Crimea on the 26th of February. And I think a lot of our colleagues who joined us here know that 26th of February is now officially the day of resistance to the occupation of Crimea in Ukraine. So this date is officially in the calendar, and we try to do as much as we can in order to make some good steps in this date. And in particular, this year in this decree, there is a very important issue which deals with Crimean Tatar people. Namely, the President has given the task to the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine to draft a strategy for the development of Crimean Tatar language for 2022-2023, and also has given the task to the Cabinet of Ministers to prepare an alphabet of Crimean Tatar language on the basis of Latin graphics. So this is really, I think, a historic moment, because we know in such harsh conditions, Crimean Tatar language now exists in temporarily occupied Crimea, and how long Crimean Tatar indigenous people were striving for having the alphabet in Latin, not in Cyrillic graphics. And I'm sure that we will move forward in this direction. Moreover, this month, on the 7th of April, Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine adopted a concept for the development of Crimean Tatar language, which is already in force, and which is already in force for the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine and for the ministries. So that is to say that we understand how important is to save Crimean Tatar language, Crimean Tatar culture, Crimean Tatar literature in the context of the occupation. Because what does the Russian Federation as the occupying power does? It just tries to develop some kind of a new Soviet citizen who does not remember where does she or he belongs to, what is her or his culture, origin, nature, traditions. And of course, we don't agree with this, and we are of course against such Russian narratives. It is also important to mention that Crimean Tatar issue is also now a high priority in Ukrainian interstate relations with other independent states, with our international partners and colleagues and friends. In particular, lately, His Excellency, the President of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, and His Excellency, the President of the Turkish Republic, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, agreed to have a project when Turkey will finance the building of 500 apartments for Crimean Tatar IDPs from Crimea, who are now residing on the territory which is controlled by the government of Ukraine. And these 500 apartments are divided like 100 apartments in Kiev, 200 apartments in Kherson city, and 200 apartments in Mykolaiv city. So we are sure that this is only the start, and we will try hard in order to have as many international projects which are linked with Crimean Tatar people as we can. Of course, for us, a high priority is a draft law on indigenous people. We are sure that Ukraine now is ready and needs a law of Ukraine which would strictly provide for the legal regulation of the rights of the indigenous people. And our office is a big proponent of this issue, and we of course are sure that the issue of Crimean Tatar people shall be regulated there. Of course, we are sure that the issue of Crimean Tatar indigenous people will also be
Please turn off your mics, please. Okay. I beg
will
your
also be no, it's okay. Will also be a high priority during the
we must create a homeland for our people and our trans children.
Ms. Lim, can you please block that? Okay, go ahead, continue, please.
We are sure that the issue of Crimean Tatar indigenous people will be a high priority during the inaugural summit of Crimean Platform, which is going to take place on the 23rd of August in Kiev. And we are sure that the Crimean Tatars will be there, will be talking there. And of course, we know that a lot of our partners on the highest level will participate in the inaugural summit of Crimean Platform. And we of course hope that this will be the start of the big international platform where Ukraine and international partners and colleagues will be able to talk and communicate regarding all the issues which relate to Crimea. What is also important for our authority, the mission of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, is that this month in April, the President signed a decree which established a strategy of activity of our state authority. So the President gave the instructions how we shall act and what shall we do. And of course, in this strategy, there are the provisions that we should counteract with the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people on the issues related to the rights of the indigenous Crimean Tatar people. So this is a task of our authority given by His Excellency, Mr. President. And of course, we will try hard to accomplish them. Why we are doing all this and why we are striving hard in order to fulfill all the tasks and assignments. This is because, of course, I think, and Mr. Savchenko, and of course, a lot of colleagues who are here in our conference are aware about the systematic violations of the rights of Crimean Tatar people in Crimea by the Russian Federation. I would not stop now in details concerning this issue, but what is important, and this is a tendency, is that really the Crimean Tatar people in Crimea is the main group of systematic violations by the Russian Federation. And this is quite obvious because Crimean Tatar people in whole are not loyal to the occupying powers regime. Crimean Tatar people are against, they are opposing the occupying powers regime. So that is why, unfortunately, these are Crimean Tatars who are the main suspects for the Russians in Crimea. And approximately 80% of all the political prisoners from Crimea are Crimean Tatars. Unfortunately, this is a tendency. Of course, we as a state, Ukraine, we are against the issue and the fact that the Russian Federation considers Majlis of Crimean Tatar people an extremist organization and prohibits its activity. We, Ukraine, consider Majlis as a self-governing body of the Crimean Tatar people, and we do understand and we do pay attention to the important job, which is done by Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, both on the governmentally controlled territory and both on the non-governmentally controlled territory. And of course, it is a big problem that there is this criminal persecution of the leaders of Crimean Tatar people, of Mustafa Dzhemiliev, Refat Chubarov, others, and that these very intelligent, very smart, and very determined people cannot come to their homeland. So they are just denied from entry to Crimea because of these mock and false prosecutors and judicial decisions by the Russian Federation. I would now stop with the issue which I think Ms. Bakali and Mr. Vitrenko were talking about this Sustainable Development Goal 16 and about justice. And I think that this is very important for our colleagues from international community to understand that there is no justice in Crimea now, and there can be no justice. Everybody has a fear that in the morning at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., somebody may come to the house and somebody may be arrested and then get a verdict for 15, 17, 19 years in jail for nothing, for just having some relations with some organizations which are deemed by the Russians as extremists. So all in all, unfortunately, Crimea now is a gray zone where human rights and rules of international humanitarian law are systematically violated by the representatives of the Russian occupying authorities. And anybody can face charges in extremism or terrorism. without committing any offense. Thus, the right to a fair trial is not secured in the temporarily occupied Crimea. And it is quite obvious that just society and access to justice can be reached for Crimean Tatars and for all other Ukrainian Crimean residents only when the occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol by the Russian Federation ends and Crimean Peninsula returns under the control of the legitimate Ukrainian government. I thank you for having the floor here, and this is a big privilege for me to be talking to you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anton, for that really exuberant and comprehensive presentation of what Ukraine is doing for the Crimean Tatar people and regaining its hold. It's quite, if I may add before I introduce our next speakers, at the onset of the 2014 occupation of Crimea, there was talk among many writers and many pundits of the possible initiatives that the indigenous status of Crimean Tatars be applied in the international arena, and how the designation of Crimean Tatars as indigenous people play out, and to really utilize this platform to make our situation explained and communicated clearly to the international community. And I must say that what you outlined on the President of Ukraine, Zelensky's strategic initiatives on the reintegration really underlines once again that how the nation of Ukraine is working to make whole the whole of its people and its nations. And this is exactly what the permanent permanent forum on indigenous issues is about. This forum is about coordinating projects relating to indigenous people, and it's also about addressing the major challenges of how to bring these issues to the UN bodies and the related agencies, and how they can assist. So this way, our issues gain tremendous amount of credibility. The voice, also the voice of the indigenous Crimean Tatars, play out in various capacities. So I thank you so very much. And what is moreover important here, that the issues of Crimean Tatars, generally speaking, the indigenous people's issues, are usually issues directed to the nation state in which they are indigenous people of. But in our case, it is an outside state, which is Russia. So when Crimean Tatars, and when we at the forum here speak about Crimean Tatar persecution, Crimean Tatar political prisoners, it's not Ukraine that is inflicting the persecution, that it is Russia that is inflicting these violations and the persecutions. So in other words, I think that the nemesis, the historical nemesis, has come again full circle and in violation of our rights. So I just wanted to bring up that point. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is my new friend, Denis Shavchenko, and he is an attorney, and he is the member of the board of Crimea SOS. And Crimea SOS is a very, very important and very symbolic non-governmental Ukrainian organization for the Crimean Tatars, because it is an organization that came to be at the outset of the 2014 occupation. And the age of Crimea SOS is 7 years old, which equals the same years of the occupation. And it originated with volunteers and civic-minded Ukrainians, civic-minded Crimean Tatars, and how it has over the years have developed and grown. And I want to thank personally to Dennis in really collaborating with me and with the Crimean Tatar diaspora in showcasing their voice in their Crimea SOS platforms as well. So Dennis, you have the floor to speak directly on the human rights issues vis-a-vis the Crimean Tatars. Thank you. Yeah.
Ms. Bakali, hello. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you. Great. I thank you for organizing this side event. My name is Denis Savchenko. I'm coordinator of NGO Crimea SOS. It is an honor for me to represent our organization at this event. Dear colleagues, dear distinguished guests, your excellencies, I thank you very much for the previous speeches, for the words and for the statements that were illustrated during this event already. I fully support everything that was said before with regard of importance of protecting Crimean Tatars as an indigenous people, with fighting injustice, with fighting human rights violations, with fighting all the evil that we now can observe on the territory of Crimea. In March 2014, Ukraine exceeded the United Nations Declaration on Protection of Rights of Indigenous People and recognized Crimean Tatars as indigenous people. It is very important, and I would like to underline that today, even though Crimea's population is consisted of very many representative of different ethnic groups, and it is a very fruitful, it is a very rich region with a very interesting story. But Crimean Tatars as a community, as a people who have been living on the territory of the peninsula for more than 400 years already, have strongest right to be protected and have the most rights to be mentioned today within the session of the UN Forum on Indigenous People. And considering the historic relations with Russian Federation, and considering the public very strong position on non-recognition of occupation of the peninsula, we today have a duty to voice out the problems and maybe some ways of resolving these problems and protecting the Crimean Tatar community. In my speech, I would like to support the statement of Mr. Anton Korinevich about that Crimean Tatars are the main target of occupation authorities and Russian Federation from the start of from the start of occupation of Crimea in 2014. And then they are the main target, not only when we talk about the politically motivated criminal persecution, but they become the victims, the most numerous victims of the other types of human rights violations. To support this statement, I would like to provide you, according to information from our organization, 44 persons have become victims of enforced disappearances in Crimea since 2014. 6 of them were later found dead. All of them are Crimean Tatars. The location, the whereabouts, and information about the condition of 15 victims of enforced disappearances is still unknown. 10 of them are Crimean Tatars. As of 29 April 2021, 103 persons are imprisoned in occupied Crimea as a result of politically motivated criminal persecution. An overwhelming majority of them, 75 persons, are Crimean Tatars. Crimean Tatars are also subjected to linguistic, religious, and ethnic discrimination, including in the process of the consideration of their cases in so-called courts. During March 2021 alone, 11 Crimean Tatar political prisoners were forcibly evicted from the courtroom during the court hearings for speaking the Crimean Tatar language. The fact that Crimean Tatar prisoners are given a meal ration with pork fat has long become a common practice of discrimination and humiliation in respect of Crimean Tatars on religious grounds. 5 cases were recorded in March 2021 alone. Crimean Tatars are also disproportionately affected by arbitrary searches. According to the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, 140 out of 186, so the vast majority of searches in Crimea were conducted in the houses of representatives of Crimean Tatar community in a period from the January 1st, 2017 to June 30, 2019. According to information from the Crimean Tatar Resource Center, 26 out of 52 searches were in Crimean Tatar houses in 2020, and respectively 64 searches out of 86 in 2019. The occupying authorities additionally intimidate activists who try to protect and try to overview the process of politically motivated criminal cases with warnings. In February 2021, on the eve of the Day of Native Language and the day of commemoration of Noman Chelyabinsk, the Crimean Prosecution Office issued warnings about impermissibility of unsanctioned protests to 9 Crimean Tatar activists, including lawyers, citizen journalists, and human rights defenders in several areas of Crimea. Additionally, I would like to stress on the fact that the majority of politically motivated criminal cases are initiated based on the so-called Hizb ut-Tahrir political party, which was banned in Russian Federation, but is not prohibited and is not recognized as extremists or terroristic on the territory of Ukraine. Moreover, the Russian Federation is one of the very few organizations that recognize Hizb ut-Tahrir as a threat to their security. And those 75 Crimean Tatars who are now being imprisoned in Crimea, all of them are being persecuted under so-called Hizb ut-Tahrir case. By using anti-extremists and anti-terroristic legislation, in a nutshell, occupation authorities in Russian Federation just tries to persecute representatives of Crimean Tatar community who exercise the Muslim religion. And this is a very common violation of religious rights conducted by Russian Federation, not only on the territory of the occupied Crimea, but also on the territories of Russian Federation and on the other occupied territories. Additionally, Russian occupation authorities silence vital Crimean Tatar media in the occupied peninsula. ATR was closed and had to move to mainland Ukraine. Other editions are denied in license and therefore had to terminate their activity on the territory of the peninsula. Bekir Mamutov, editor-in-chief of a newspaper, Kirim, has been subjected to administrative case for citing a report of the UN Secretary General where the Majlis was mentioned and where there was no mentioning of the fact that Russian Federation illegally recognized Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people as extremist organization. And what is even more problematic is that Bekir Mamutov was punished in administrative way even after the international court institutions recognized decision of the Supreme Court of Russian Federation on banning Majlis of the Crimean Tatars and recognizing this executive body of the Crimean Tatar people as extremists organization, as illegal and invalid. Well, there are many violations that Crimean Tatar representatives of Crimean Tatar community are suffering from. But what is even more important is that Crimean Tatar were the first who voiced their refusal to conform the process of occupation. They were the first who started providing assistance to Ukrainian military men in blocked military bases on the initial stage of the occupation. Crimean Tatars were the one who went on the February 26th to the Parliament of Crimea and started a rally, which was extremely vital for and which significantly, dramatically disrupted the plans of Russian Federation on silent and fast occupation of Crimean Peninsula. Crimean Tatars are mostly the only community representatives of Crimean Tatar people in Crimea as of now who continue to conduct peaceful resistance to the occupation of Crimea, who continue to support each other and representatives of other ethnic groups on the territory of Crimea in their efforts to protect themselves from the policy of terror and from the human rights violations and systematic persecution that occupational authorities are conducting using instructions, definitely using instructions from Kremlin. So today I would like to thank representatives of Crimean Tatar people. Today I would like to remind ourselves that Crimean Tatar people have already paid a very horrific price for our hope to, at one day, to be in Ukraine united with Crimea. I would like to remind you of the names of Reshat Ametov, and I would like to remind you of the name of Vedjiye Kashka, a veteran of national Crimean Tatar movement, who unfortunately will not be able to see the occupation of Crimea themselves because they died for it. But we have to move on. We have to continue providing efforts to make the occupation as possible as we can, and as fast as we can. And of course, I really hope that at some point the agenda for the session of UN Forum on Indigenous people will include questions of development and how indigenous people, including Crimean Tatars, support and drive democratic and very modern movements and changes, not only in Ukraine, but all around the world. With these words, I want to again thank you, Ms. Ayla Bakkali, for organizing this event. I want to thank all the panelists, and I'm very glad that the panelists are consisted with representatives of Crimean Tatar community, because it is very important to give the voice to representatives of Crimean Tatar people during such an important events. So thank you very much, and Crimea is Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for that not only factual account, but very impassioned account, because Crimean Tatars are passionate about their homeland and passionate about their issues. And therefore, it's reflected in the hard facts and the hard judicial decrees. And between those lines, there are a lot of tears, a lot of sacrificing, and a lot of hard reality. And that was excellent. And I'm so glad that you had Crimea SOS, because you have really captured the esprit, the core of the indigenous Crimean Tatars in your messaging. If I may now move on to our Crimean Tatar Youth Q Hub. And it was very interesting when we discussed what is the topic that you wish to discuss. And there was a unanimous consensus that they wanted to talk about on the language and the lack of institutions which house, protect, and propagate indigenous Crimean Tatar language. Because as we know, language is a very personal matter, and it is a very important matter for Ukraine as well on many levels. As indigenous Crimean Tatar youth, it's so important that this permanent forum showcases what talent there are out there. It showcase how these Crimean Tatar youth can become leaders one day of their communities, and how it's important for the survival of Crimean Tatar culture that representative youth also have a voice. In the year 2018, the UN Permanent Forum focused on indigenous youth, and it was its 10th year anniversary at that time, and all indigenous youth around the world gathered. And I hope that on the next round of indigenous youth, that we flood the United Nations with indigenous Crimean Tatar youth, as the youth hold the power to shift the dynamics of the world and to change and provide leadership for the future and build strong identities. And with that, I would like to begin first to introduce an exemplar Crimean Tatar young man, Emil Ibrahimov, and he is the president of Q Hub. And Emil, the microphone is yours.
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me, Ayla Hanum?
Yes, thank you. I do.
And see me. Yeah.
And I see you. Thank you.
Dear Excellencies, panelists, Crimean Tatar youth, and dear viewers, you see that our event gets the interest from third side that was expected. Now we can only guess what was it a coincidence or not? I think not. So I'm glad to be the voice of Crimean Tatar youth and at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous peoples, and to represent our young non-governmental public organization, Crimean Project and Educational Platform, QHub. Thank you for the opportunity. For 7 years, I have not been able to live freely and quickly in the homeland of my ancestors. I feel an extraordinary connection with my land and the life that I lived in Crimea, which is now occupied by the Russian Federation. For 50 years, my parents and my grandparents lived as victims under Soviet communism, and they suffered greatly. All the violation of human rights, international conventions that are documented in 7 UN General Assembly resolutions from 2014 to 2021 reminds us that once again, the Russian Federation is targeting indigenous people in their homeland. We thank the United Nations nations who voted in support of Ukraine's resolutions on the human rights situation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. In a way, the United Nations General Assembly resolutions are the foundation that is built to also correct historical wrongs, that Crimea is not Russia and that Crimea is Ukraine. As a young Crimean Tatar public figure, I want to say that my colleagues and other young Crimean Tatar youth who have already spoken at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous peoples this year and previous years, who represented the Crimean Tatar people at other events organized by international organizations, and who work in the state and non-governmental sectors of Ukraine and Europe have only one goal, is to help Ukraine deoccupy Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine. The indigenous Crimean Tatars who are currently living under the Russian occupation live in danger of being imprisoned. I don't want to sound pathetic, but I'm taking a risk too. If I should visit Crimea to see my friends and family, that not only I'm placing them at risk, but I'm at risk as well. My parents deported, lived in exile, and I was born in independent Ukraine and in a free Crimea thanks to their struggle to return. I have no desire to live anywhere but in Crimea, Ukraine. I want the United Nations Permanent Forum to know that it is where I want to build my future. The Russian occupation power in Crimea reminds me of a huge bulldozer that demolishes everything in its path, justifying their crimes, detentions, searches, torture of Crimean Tatar activists. They loudly declare to the whole world, we have made the Crimean Tatar language state in Crimea. This done means writing on paper and putting a seal, calling it a law. In other words, this law does not work. This statistic shows that only 7% of Crimean Tatars children receive education in their native language. Let me read out short excerpts from the recording about the court session, which were made by human rights activists in occupied Crimea by the NGO Crimean Solidarity. Riza Izetov addresses the courtroom in Crimean Tatar language only because he does not trust the courtroom judiciary to present the real facts. He does feel confident as a political prisoner that he will receive a fair trial, so as a means of applying his own indigenous justice, Reza decides to employ his native language to give the truthful account of the situation. He makes the use of his native language as his only authentic, trustable defense. The first day of Russia's trial of Crimean Tatar journalist Remzi Bekirov and 4 other civic and human rights activists ended with all 5 recognized political prisoners being expelled from the court for insisting on their right to speak Crimean Tatar. This, however, was after Raim Ayvazov described in harrowing detail how FSB officers had taken him to a forest and tortured him, including by staging a mock execution, in order to force him to give false testimony against himself and other political prisoners. Remzi Bekirov has applied the same use of his language as his defense. Remzi Bekirov, Reza Izyetov, Raim Ayvazov, Shaban Umerov are Crimean Tatar activists and now political prisoners. They all faced 12 to 22 years in prison. Their activism in struggle for their rights was called by the Russian authorities a simple word: terrorism. Other political prisoners, Shaban Umerov and Farhod Bazarov, joined their actions at the trial to defend themselves in the Crimean Tatar language. The so-called court proceedings are in the Russian language only. The judiciary refused to allow indigenous Crimean Tatar political prisoners to speak their native language. They state that all the proceedings in Russia are conducted only in Russian language. The judge warned the Crimean Tatar prisoners would be removed from the courtroom if they continue to speak Crimean Tatar language in the court which is located in Crimea. Please don't forget my words here today. Next time you hear in the halls of the United Nations that all rights of Crimean Tatars are protected is a big lie. Another such story from the life of political prisoner in Crimea, prominent Crimean Tatar lawyer Emil Kurbidinov, winner of the International Frontline Defenders Award, reported that his client, activist Uzair Abdullayev, was sent from a regular prison to a cell for 5 days for finding a letter in his cell in the Crimean Tatar language that he wanted to send to his family. But we, Crimean Tatar youth, do not stand on the sidelines as victims. Despite the persecution, despite the repression, we do not hate. The feeling of unrighteousness and despair gave us incredible energy. We still have hope for our future. Our non-governmental organization, the Crimean Project and Educational Platform, was formed as a response to the challenge posed to us in 2016, which is 2 years after the 2014 occupation of Crimean Peninsula. Today, QHub is working on a media project to attract many Crimean youth as possible to the mainland of Ukraine, as the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues indicates the importance of institutions for indigenous people. In particular, the Crimean Tatars within their tradition, culture, hold a high regard for education. Therefore, the institutions that support education is paramount to ensure a high quality and culture appropriate education for indigenous peoples. This is also protected by a number of international human rights instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, ILO Convention 169, and the International Covenant on Economic, Cultural, and Social Rights, and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in a Ukrainian or Western university will affect our future in the fight for Crimea. In addition, QHub is working on project online course on the Crimean Tatar language, and of recent is collaborating on projects with the Ukrainian Ministry for Integration of Ukraine, especially in matters of the Crimean Tatar language, and with the recent case of the political prisoners. The Crimean Tatar language is now prohibited its use in the homeland of Crimean Tatars. The judiciary in occupied Crimea used as an instrument of defense, therefore they prohibit. In addition, other indigenous Ukrainian non-governmental organization and the Ministry of Reintegration of Ukraine developing the preservation of Crimean Tatar language institutions. The role of QHub within the project provides guidelines how virtual institution can be developed while we await our return to Crimea to rebuild the very institutions that have been destroyed by the occupier. Having stated briefly the situation about our indigenous Crimean Tatar youth organization recommends to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. Call on intergovernmental United Nations agency, NGO, foundations, donors, including those within the UN and outside the UN, as well as other non-governmental organizations to promote the development of the Crimean Tatar language in Ukraine. And two, we ask to include proposals on the development of the Crimean Tatar language and on promoting high quality, higher education for Crimean Tatars in the recommendation by the UN intergovernmental agencies and of the UN Economic and Social Council. We at QHub work to against all the colonial policies that are generational imposed, first by Imperial Russia, then Soviet Russia, and now signed 2014, Russian Federation. Our struggle continues. We will never give up. So next year we will meet in Bakhchisarai. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emil, for an excellent presentation. And I do appreciate so very much your efforts into integrating your NGO organization into the existing Ukrainian program, because that's what this UN Permanent Forum is intended to do, is to find out the existing programs and the existing initiatives out there, and which these goals can come together. And I would like to now bring on the next Crimean Tatar youth speaker, and she is Adile Hayretdinova, and she also would like to present a talk on, again, preserving the institution of language, and she wants to add a personal story, her personal viewpoint. Adele, can you please, you have the microphone.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, then I want to start. First, I wish to thank Your Excellencies first and all our guests here for the opportunity to be heard. Thanks to the Forum of Indigenous People of the UN itself, which enables the people who are at the basis of social life and the cultural component of the world to function and convey the most pressing issues and problems that exist at the moment. Today, I want to share a piece of my story about what it means to be a Crimean Tatar youth under the scenario of the 2014 occupation. Perhaps talking about the problems of the Crimean Tatars against the background of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen or the ongoing war in Syria and countless casualties is not entirely correct, but I can say with the complete confidence that what is happening to my people is certainly lasting longer than in those countries that were announced above. So let's start. It all started with the Russian imperialism, which seized my historical homeland, Crimea. But under the Soviet regime, the modern identity of the Crimean Tatars were defined. That is the mass deportation of the Crimean Tatars from their homeland to the places of exile where my grandmother and grandfather were not really welcomed. By the way, it killed the desire and attempts of the Crimean Tatars to establish the self-governing institutions. Soviet Russia forced my people not only to abandon their land, their homes, their traditions, their institutions, and their language, and the Crimean Tatar institutions, which were protected and promoted and promulgated my indigenous language. A people spoken language is perhaps its most important cultural attribute. Social policy has in the past been used to place indigenous languages on the bottom of their to-do list. Language policy is being used in occupied Crimea today as an instrument of domination, fragmentation, and assimilating into the occupier institutions. We cannot speak Crimean Tatar language in occupied Crimea today. If, for example, I am inside a bus and I speak with Crimean Tatar language with my grandmother, I will get a not friendly look. There is no linguistic diversity in occupied Crimea. Under condition of maximum pressure, people without freedom are in search of possibility of their further existence, but in no way the desire for the development of the language. Especially when you realize that, that you are in the minority and simply weaker. Language in the past was, and even now, is definitely not in the first positions. Although I cannot not to say about the resistance through the literature, music, and media that exist even now. For understandable geopolitical causes, Crimea is a territory belonging to Ukraine. And until 2014, the Ukrainian Tatars had more or less human rights. But it's better to read about this in the reports that were voiced by the representative body of the Crimean Tatars, the Mejlis and Kurultai, until 2014. At the moment, the legal successor of the Russian Empire, in every possible way, takes away the possibility of the Crimean Tatars for development, which cannot be said about the actions of Ukraine in relation to the Crimean Tatars. Having seized my native peninsula, the Russian Federation, using all its capabilities, for example, media and even infrastructure, they want to show that under its regime, the indigenous people are not that good, but even better. We cannot be sad about the number of political prisoners in prison. By the way, they are mostly Crimean Tatars, as well as about the level of the language. They said that the foundation of nation is its language. I'm the second generation in my family who learned my mother tongue as a foreign one. Is it surprising to learn your native language as a foreign one? Isn't it? The foundation that were deprived of for many years, first by the prohibition on its use, and then by the forcible introduction into the Russian language, into all spheres of life, is now on the verge of complete destruction. And there are many examples like my family. When I was 11, my family and I returned to our historical homeland, to Crimea, where, as it turned out, the situation with the Crimean Tatar language particularly did not exist. We were still in translation from Soviet mode to independent Ukrainian mode. Just imagine, on the land of the indigenous people, there were no and there are no tools for learning the language of these people. The most positive thing in this story is that just recently, the government of Ukraine approved a strategy for the development of the Crimean Tatar language, which has not happened since the return of the Crimean Tatars to their historical homeland. And this gives very great hope to all of us that we will be able, with all our efforts, to preserve what is already there, to revive, breathe a new life into our language. And for this, we vitally need the support of world community, and of course Ukraine, of which, with the Crimea and the Crimean Tatars, are an integral part. So I just have to say that all of us, we are stronger together.
Thank you so much, Adil. Again, another impassioned speech on the Crimean Tatar language. This could give everyone, the listeners, and to Ukraine a sense of what an important policy initiative it has taken to accept the Crimean Tatar language in Latin script, and how really happy and hopeful that you have made the Crimean Tatar people in that respect. I would like to now bring on another Crimean Tatar youth, Zora Mustafayev, and whose thoughts on the Crimean Tatar language is very unique and very well positioned. I would like to hear the final product. I saw the draft, but now I like to hear the final. The microphone is yours, Zora.
I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
And thank you, Ayla Hanım, for the introduction, Your Excellencies, panelists, the United Nations Permanent Forum youth members, and our distinguished Zoom guests. My name is Zarya, and I'm Crimean Tatar youth representative that was born in Eskikhirim, which old city of Crimea. Until I was 5 years old, I spoke only Crimean Tatar language. But I grew up and began to slowly socialize at the level of kindergarten, elementary school, with my extracurricular activities. In my surrounding, I was always heard the Russian language spoken. It was always the dominant language of teaching and learning in my classes when I was in Crimea before the 2014 occupation. Nowhere at any school did I hear the spoken Crimean Tatar language. Gradually, as a young person, I stopped speaking Crimean Tatar language, even at home. After graduating from my high school in Crimea, I realized that I could now speak Russian, Ukrainian, and even English languages much better than my own indigenous Crimean Tatar language, my native language. The loss of what is rightfully yours and the loss of what was never yours feels different. For example, what I meant to say, what I learned at Perth, which is my mother tongue, I lost. I didn't know how I came to lose it, but it was gone. When we lose a language, any language, including indigenous language, we don't just lose words, we also lose part of our identity. Approximately 7,000 indigenous languages are spoken around the world, and 4 out of 10 are in danger of disappearing. This reported in the United Nations report written by UNESCO. The UNESCO report does not need a footnote. I am, as indigenous Crimean Tatar youth representative, is a footnote on the impending extinction of indigenous languages, case study of the Crimean Tatar language. Back then, I was very terrified. At that moment, it seemed to me that I had lost everything, and that I would never be able to speak my native language as I did when I was 5 years old. In Atlas of the worst languages in danger, the Crimean Tatar language is ranked among the extinct. Sadly, our Crimean Tatar language is spoken mostly by our indigenous elders. Over the course of my personal life, and I'm 21 years old, I witnessed the gradual loss of my language when we have Crimean Tatar visitors our home. It is premature to talk about its functioning in the field of public education, and even more so in the field of science when we are not even speaking it at home. This status of language is a consequence of almost half a century of discriminatory policy that was carried out against the Crimean Tatars. The Soviet totalitarian regime pursued a policy of violence russification, assimilation policies against the Crimean Tatars. Of social functional use of the Crimean Tatar language during the exile was spoken among the within family members. The 1944 deportation to place of exile did not provide Crimean Tatar schools, nor instructors. There were no radio or TV broadcasts, no newspapers, and no magazines were published. Plus, the Crimean Tatars suffered discriminatory conditions. Forceful imposition of the dominant culture was purposefully enacted on Crimean Tatar initiatives. Sadly, today the story of language discrimination is still playing out since the 2014 occupation of the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine. Today, there is no reliable data on the total number of Crimean Tatars in our country, on the number of people who recognize the Crimean Tatar language as a native language. The last population census took place back in 2001 under independent Ukraine. Then about 90% of the Crimean Tatars define their native language to be Crimean Tatar. So even so, Crimean Tatars claim that their native language is Crimean Tatar, yet the number of speakers is actually much lower than 90% of the Crimean Tatars. My pool of statistics, which include my friends and parents and relatives, indicate about 20%. The Crimean Tatar language functions mainly as a family language in the form of old territorial dialects, limitedly in the media and in the fields of education. For example, today it's about 7 schools with Crimean Tatar as a language of instruction. So why do the Crimean Tatars who consider the Crimean Tatar language to be their native language, in real life still more often use the Russian language, even in communications with each other? As always, there is a reason for this. This is due to various factors, both linguistic and extra-linguistic. In spontaneous communication, the Russian language is spoken. Even if it is not preferred, it is the only language that majority of Crimean Tatars have learned during exile, and the lack of education institution as a cause of the loss of indigenous Crimean Tatar language. Harmonious bilingualism can only be ensured on the basis of fluency in the native language. It is a good thing to know many languages, and any language is okay, but one must know its own traditional language. For us, as indigenous peoples, one of the main tasks is to preserve our native language. It is our responsibility, and no one can replace this responsibility. If our language exists, it will be because of our individual efforts. If we lose it, it will also be our responsibility. As a QHub communication member, we would like to outline the following ways and recommendations on how we can begin to rebuild the Crimean Tatar institution that will support the promotion and use and revival of the Crimean Tatar language. First of all, self-initiative, self-learning and mastering the native language at all levels, such as speaking, understanding, reading and writing are the key points. In this order, we shall support community organizations that hold informal Crimean Tatar language session, or it can be classes. So what can Ukraine do to help someone like me to never have lost the Crimean Tatar language? Quite a lot. To bring the Crimean Tatar language as a high school curriculum, in addition to all other languages. To promote a permanent linguistic environment by increasing airtime on radio and television, which presuppose continuous radio and TV broadcasting in areas with high concentration of Crimean Tatars. And to establish a publishing house that will house and publish materials on Crimean Tatar language. Our grandparents and our parents have very old, precious Crimean Tatar books and hold timeless indigenous knowledge, and know how it would be great if an Ukrainian publisher can collect these books and translate them. As an indigenous youth representative, I would like to thank Ukraine on its support in the development of the Crimean Tatar language based on the Latin script. I would like to thank your excellencies for that. In conclusion, I'm happy to share with all of you that I have reclaimed my language. I speak Crimean Tatar, and I am, as a QHub member, working with the Ukrainian government on its development of the Crimean Tatar language until 2032. Ukraine, which has joined the decade of the indigenous language, covering the period from 2022 to 2032, desires to draw attention to be critical level as an endangered language of the native Crimean Tatar, and the need to preserve revitalize and promote its use. The Ukrainian Ministry of Reintegration has already turned to Google and to Duolingo with a request to integrate the Crimean Tatar language into their technological platforms. This work will be carried out also within the framework of the United Nations International Decade of Indigenous Languages. And I'm excited to be a part of Indigenous people community. And I'm excited to be a part of this decade of the United Nations International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Zora. We have exactly 1 minute, and we had also a video, but I think our time may be up. Muslim, how did you, and we had one question from Andriy Dobryansky for Anton Kronovich. How should we do this? Muslim, how long is your project? Your video?
Hello everyone, dear colleagues. My project is 9 minutes.
Oh, 9 minutes. I think we would run a little bit over. Should we is it okay for has time to view the video? Perhaps we can, let's take a look at it because you worked so very hard on it. And let's take a look at your video, please, Mr.
I would like to make my speech in Crimean Tatar language, but I had to make it understandable for everyone. So I decided to make a video and let me show it to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Muslim Umerov. I'm a journalist, a musician, my nationality is Crimean Tatar, Krymlu, and I am a citizen of Ukraine. Each listed position is a part of me that is inseparable, and without even one of it, I am not who I am. But now I would like to tell you about the situation of the Crimean Tatar language in reality through a story about myself. Selam алейкум, Юахарым телеканалында хаберлер жанлы yayında, студияда Muslim Umerov buluna. My parents were born in Uzbekistan and studied in Russian schools. They studied there because the level of education in Uzbekistan language schools was much lower than in Russian-speaking homes. My father was more lucky than my mother. Close family ties and life in a large family where only Crimean Tatar is spoken helped to learn the language of the Crimean Tatars. They returned to the Crimea almost at my age. Most of the people would wonder why they did not learn the language. But it was impossible because the infrastructure of Crimean Tatar life couldn't exist that time.
Алуште, Ялте, люди требуют, чтобы им были созданы условия для скорейшего возвращения на родину. Справедливости ради надо сказать, что местные власти оказывают посильную помощь, выделяют земельные участки. Уже справила новоселье первая крымско-татарская деревня, но ресурсов в области не хватает для всех желающих. На днях Совмин СССР принял постановление, которое является первоочередной, неотложной частью разрабатываемой государственной программы возвращения крымских татар.
Then I was born. As a child, I heard native speech more from my grandparents and less from my parents. I asked questions as why we call ourselves Crimean Tatars, but we don't speak the language and everything around us is in Russian.
Крым – начало 90-х. Некогда процветающая всесоюзная здравница превратилась в пепелище.
I heard my native speech in such places as funerals, memorial days, weddings and birthdays. Also, the native speech was heard on the 18th of May, Genocide Memorial Day of Crimean Tatars. This is the day when my people continued to be destroyed, but when it didn't work out too.
This year it's 70 years anniversary. New Crimean authorities said they were afraid of provocations. They were afraid that this would somehow undermine the holiday season here in Crimea. People walked here by foot. They walked to this mosque on the outskirts of Simferopol, but they were guarded by Russian riot police. For anyone who remembers the events of deportation, this is hugely symbolic. 70 years ago today, thousands of Tatar families were kicked out of their homes, were put in the trains, and were deported thousands of kilometers away to Uzbekistan.
Until the Crimean Tatar language was heard on the state channel Crimea, it was a breath of air in my childhood. Of course, it was not at all competition with other Ukrainian or Russian channels, and even more so with Turkish ones. Many of my peers were not interested in the Crimean Tatar theme at all. The problem lay down under that visually it looked very weak. And this wasn't the fault of Crimean Tatars themselves. After all, everything that has been done and is continued to be done is the personal initiative of the people who have responsibility.
Akçı saray bizimdir ay içi dolu yüzümdür seni bana sevdirgen ay eki kara kozumdur ay çimçararay çimçararay ray ray ocak başında kardan ay kumpararay ray ray.
In 2010, a Crimean Tatar businessman from Moscow began to make investment in the culture and infrastructure of the Crimean Tatars. Maybe he was also one of those people who couldn't help but take responsibility for the future. That was why the TV channel and the radio in which he invested money became a real school of the Crimean Tatar language. This channel was watched by everyone. With the help of it, the Crimean Tatar of the world were able to unite because they understood what was happening in Crimea, including through news in Crimean Tatar and analytical programs. And it's important to note that it was a personal initiative, not the help of the state.
Leli telekanalımızda aç olduğum programımızla başlayımız. Bugün biz yardımcılarımızla tatlı bir pirog yapacağımız. Lakin evvela geliniz yardımcılarımla tanış olunuz. Benim yanımda Arzu, Elmas ve Hasan. Hoş geldiniz.
Selamünaleyküm.
Aleykümselam. Nasılsınız?
Yaxşımız.
When I graduated from high school, I spent a long time choosing between studying Crimean Tatar or Turkish. I have chosen Turkish because I saw the model of the language and its manifestations in movies, programs, newspapers, and of course music. I chose it and taught it, and simultaneously worked on the radio and ATR TV channel. I understood that there was no other way to popularize the language.
Yerden su куфрі.
Все мете підлогу, прибиральник день за днем. Брудно лається і часом із відра води хлюпне.
At the moment, the Crimea is occupied, but the language is continuing to be a means of resistance. One part of the Crimean Tatars went to the mainland and keep up trying to resist and defend their rights politically. The other part remained in the Crimea and resist culturally. Political prisoners speak Crimean Tatar on the courts, and more weddings are held exclusively in Crimean Tatar, with the use of national symbolic and clothing of the nation. Children and families' content are published in the Crimean Tatar language. Most of the music is written in the Crimea, and music videos are released there.
Olmasın insan, insana karşı cenk. Onun da idare etkenleri var gerçek. Olarga da ne insan canı gerek, ne güneş, ne de kokulu çiçek, ne de köpek. Siyaseye doyunu mu yoksa kim?
For 30 years, Ukraine has shown that this year the government is ready to take up the restoration and support the Crimean Tatar language in order to save the people from destruction. Information aggression is now playing an important role. It will be important for Ukraine to focus on the West and not on Russia in, for example, creating content for the development of the language of the Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians. Why so? The answer lays on the side that in the CIS countries, content is made in order to make money. And in the UA and the USA, content is made by choosing an audience and adapting to its interests. In this speech, I'd like to say that the Crimean Tatars can do a lot and for a long time themselves and are ready to resist all difficulties. But together with the titular nation of Ukraine, the Ukrainians, we can build a truly strong and free state. We know how to do it, and we propose to do it together.
Thank you so very much, Muslim Imerov. He is the Communications and Medium Director at Q-Hub, and you made this platform very exciting for us with the film. And we passed our time, and it is now 2:40. I thank everyone. Mr. Yuri Vitrenko, thank you so very much for staying on board with us. I hope you enjoyed the session. Mr. Anton Kronovich, Your Excellency, thank you very much for updating us. And Mr. Denis Shavchenko, I thank you, and a personal hug to you as well. And our Crimean Tatar youth, which I absolutely love. And I'm so proud of you and so proud of your parents who have raised you so well. Thank you, everyone. And we will close this 20th session together. And next time in Bacha Sedai.